Something is happening right now in one of the most strategic waterways on the planet. And if you blink, you might miss just how serious it is. Hundreds of oil tankers are sitting motionless. Billions of dollars in cargo is frozen. And the force that was supposed to control this entire region is now scrambling to explain what went wrong. The Strait of Hormuz, just 21 miles wide at its narrowest point. A strip of water so small you could almost swim across it. Yet this tiny passage carries nearly a fifth of all the oil that moves on this planet. Every single day, tankers packed with crude oil from Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Kuwait, the UAE, and Iran itself pass through here. Whoever controls the Strait of Hormuz holds the energy supply of the entire world in their hands. For decades, that power sat with one force, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, Iran's most elite military branch, the force that answers directly to Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, the force that has spent years building weapons, training militias, and projecting power across the Middle East. And at the center of their Hormuz strategy was a structure that changed everything. A bridge, not just any bridge. A military and logistical bridge so critical that analysts called it Iran's gateway to choking the world economy. That bridge is now gone, and what has happened since is something no one in Tehran was prepared for. To understand why this matters, you need to understand what the IRGC had built in the Strait over the last decade. They had positioned themselves as the undisputed gatekeepers of Hormuz. Fast attack boats, submarine capabilities, missile systems aimed directly at tanker routes, artificial islands turned into surveillance posts. And for years, this strategy worked. The threat alone was enough. Every time tensions rose in the region, oil markets shook. Every time Iran flexed near the Strait, the world paid attention. The IRGC's control over Hormuz was not just military, it was psychological. But here is what most people do not realize. That psychological dominance depended entirely on one thing: credibility. The belief that Iran could shut the Strait down the moment it chose to. And that credibility rested on infrastructure, on logistics, on the physical ability to coordinate forces across the waterway at a moment's notice. Remove that infrastructure and the entire strategy collapses. That is exactly what has now happened. The consequences are spreading faster than anyone in the region expected. Iran's relationship with the Strait of Hormuz goes back to the very foundation of the Islamic Republic. When Ayatollah Khomeini came to power in 1979, one of the first strategic realizations the new government made was simple. Iran did not need a world-class navy. It did not need aircraft carriers. It did not need to match the United States ship for ship. It only needed to threaten the Strait. This became the cornerstone of Iranian deterrence for over 40 years. During the Iran-Iraq War, Iranian forces fought what historians call the Tanker War, attacking shipping in the Persian Gulf to pressure Saddam Hussein's oil revenues. The tactic worked well enough that both sides were striking oil infrastructure by the mid-1980s. That lesson stayed with the IRGC for generations. By the 2010s, the IRGC naval forces had transformed the Strait into what military analysts called an anti-access area denial zone. Small, fast speedboats swarming around massive tankers, underground missile bunkers along the Iranian coastline, drone surveillance sweeping the shipping lanes, and at the heart of all this, the logistics chain that connected Iran's southern islands, its coastal bases, and its command structures into a single coordinated threat system. The bridge was part of that chain, and when it fell, it did not just fall alone. It took something else with it, something the IRGC had spent 40 years building. Here is what happened. And this is where things take a serious turn. Iranian state media confirmed the destruction of what officials described as a critical logistical link in the IRGC's southern command structure. The bridge in question connected supply routes used by IRGC naval and missile units operating near the Strait. It was not simply a road bridge, it was the artery through which equipment, ammunition, and personnel moved to reach the forward positions from which Iran projected its Hormuz threat. Losing it did not just inconvenience the IRGC, it severed the operational chain. Now consider the timing. This did not happen in isolation. In the weeks leading up to this event, multiple layers of Iran's regional military architecture had already been under extraordinary strain. Proxy networks across Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and Yemen that the IRGC had spent years nurturing were either degraded, decapitated, or cut off from their Iranian supply lines. Key commanders had been eliminated in successive operations that Iranian officials struggled to explain publicly. And then the bridge. Within hours of the news breaking, tanker traffic in the eastern approaches to the Strait began slowing. Not because the waterway was physically blocked, but because shipping insurers, naval coordinators, and tanker captains all faced the same sudden uncertainty. If Iran's forward command infrastructure near Hormuz had been compromised, what else had been hit? What other surprises were waiting? Was this the beginning of something larger? Those questions froze decision-making. And frozen decision-making in the shipping industry means one thing: ships stop moving. Within 48 hours, the backlog of tankers waiting at the mouth of the Strait had grown to a number that energy analysts had not seen since the worst moments of the 2019 Gulf tensions. Hundreds of vessels, billions of barrels of potential capacity, sitting, waiting. And inside Tehran, something even more significant was happening. The IRGC was scrambling, not publicly. Publicly, Iranian state television ran footage of IRGC speedboats conducting exercises. Officials gave speeches about Iran's unbreakable resolve. Commanders made statements about the Strait being Iran's to control for as long as the Islamic Republic exists. But what happened next changed everything. Behind the scenes, three things became clear almost simultaneously. Iranian military engineers were working around the clock to establish alternative supply routes to their southern Hormuz positions. The speed with which they began this work suggested they understood exactly how serious the damage was. You do not mobilize emergency engineering teams unless the situation is critical. Communications intercepts analyzed by regional intelligence services showed elevated internal IRGC traffic in the days following the bridge's destruction. Military bureaucracies communicate more when they are in crisis. The volume of those communications suggested a command structure reacting to an emergency, not conducting business as usual. And perhaps, most telling of all, the IRGC's public posture began shifting. The provocative fast boat operations near foreign naval vessels, a standard IRGC tactic for signaling dominance near the Strait, declined sharply. Not disappeared, but declined, as if someone had quietly ordered the more aggressive units to stand down while the situation was being assessed. What this all pointed to was something unprecedented. For the first time in decades, the IRGC's ability to credibly threaten the Strait of Hormuz was in question. Not eliminated, not permanently destroyed, but shaken enough that even Iranian strategists had to acknowledge, at least internally, that their most powerful deterrent had been weakened. The world's most consequential choke point was suddenly in a different kind of uncertainty. And the ripple effects were moving outward in every direction. Oil markets twitched, not in panic, but in that careful, calculating way that energy markets move when something fundamental shifts in the geography of supply. Analysts who track IRGC capability began quietly revising their threat assessments. Gulf state governments, which had spent years navigating the balance between American security guarantees and Iranian intimidation, began recalculating. Because if Iran cannot reliably threaten to close Hormuz, the entire regional balance of power starts tilting, and Iran knows it. That is the moment that makes the IRGC's current predicament so extraordinary. They are not facing a conventional military defeat. They are facing something far more damaging. A credibility crisis. A moment where the threat they have spent 40 years building is suddenly less believable than it was before. In deterrence theory, that is not just a tactical problem. That is a strategic emergency. And for an organization that has always operated in the space between actual conflict and implicit threat, losing that middle ground is the worst possible outcome. The hundreds of tankers still waiting outside the Strait are not just a logistical problem, they are a symbol. A visible, floating, real-time representation of what happens when the enforcer loses their grip. Every day those ships wait, every cargo delayed, every insurance assessment updated, every shipping coordinator who quietly reroutes around the uncertainty is making the same calculation. Iran's hold on Hormuz is not what it used to be. Here is what we are really watching unfold. Iran built its entire regional deterrence strategy on a single premise, that it could threaten to shut down the global energy supply at any moment it chose. The Strait of Hormuz was not just a geographic asset. It was the foundation of Iran's leverage with every country on Earth. It was why American aircraft carrier groups had to stay positioned in the Persian Gulf. It was why Gulf states paid billions for air defense systems. It was why European governments could not simply ignore Tehran no matter how much they wanted to. The bridge is gone, but the question it has opened is far larger than any bridge. What happens to a deterrence strategy when the infrastructure behind it starts to fail? What happens to a military organization when its most visible power projection asset is suddenly in question? And what does this mean for the hundreds of tankers, the global energy markets, and the delicate balance that has kept the Strait commercially open for decades? The IRGC is not finished. They still have missiles. They still have boats. They still have the geographic reality of the Strait itself. None of that disappears overnight. But something has changed, and the most dangerous moments in geopolitics are never the moments of obvious defeat. They are the moments when a powerful actor realizes its position is slipping and begins calculating what it must do to reassert itself. Iran is in that calculation right now. Whatever comes next, it will not be quiet. Something extraordinary just happened. And if you made it this far, you already know why this matters. But here's the thing, most people watching videos like this never do. They watch, they understand, and then they scroll away. And within an hour, the algorithm has already buried what they just learned under 15 other videos competing for the same 30 seconds of their attention. Do not let that happen here. Because what is unfolding in the Strait of Hormuz right now is not a one-time event. It is the opening move in something much larger. The IRGC does not absorb a blow like this and go quiet. History tells us exactly what comes next. Pressure builds, desperation sets in, and desperate actors in strategic choke points have a way of making decisions that shock the entire world. The next development in this story could come tomorrow. It could come tonight. And when it does, you need to be the person in the room who already understood the context, who already saw this coming, who can explain to everyone around them exactly why it matters and what it means. That is what this channel exists for. Not headlines, not hot takes, not the surface level coverage that tells you what happened but never explains why the world just shifted underneath your feet. Every single week, this channel breaks down the events that the mainstream conversation either misses entirely or gets completely wrong. The military moves that happen below the radar, the geopolitical calculations that never make the front page, the moments where the real story is 3 layers deeper than what anyone is reporting. If the Hormuz situation kept you watching until this very second, then you already know this is exactly where you need to be. So do one thing right now, hit subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. Not because of some algorithm metric, but because the next video in this series is already being built, and it goes somewhere most people are not expecting. We are going to look at what Iran's options actually are right now, what a cornered IRGC historically does when its deterrence credibility is challenged, and which specific flashpoint in the region is most likely to become the next major escalation. That video drops soon, and if you are not subscribed with notifications on, there is a real chance you will miss it entirely. While you are here, go back and watch the last 3 videos on this channel. Because what is happening in Hormuz does not exist in isolation. It connects directly to events in Yemen, in Lebanon, and in the South China Sea that we broke down in detail over the past several weeks. Watch those videos back to back, and you will walk away with a picture of global power dynamics that almost no one in your circle has. That is the advantage this channel gives you. Not just one story, the full map. And if this video gave you something real, something you are going to think about tomorrow morning, share it with one person. Just one. Someone who you know pays attention to the world. Someone who deserves to understand what is actually happening beyond the noise. The Strait of Hormuz is not just an oil story. It is a story about power, about deterrence, about what happens when the rules that have quietly governed global stability for decades start to crack. We are going to follow this story wherever it goes. Subscribe, turn on notifications, stay with us, because the next chapter is coming, and you do not want to be the last person to see it. The Strait of Hormuz has always been where the world holds its breath, and right now, the world is holding its breath harder than it has in a very long time. Watch this space, because the next move could reshape everything.